Under the abnormal heat that enveloped everything, the city began to face the plight of power rationing. Mountain fires erupted frequently, the river water gradually dried up, and outdoor laborers one by one lost their lives due to heatstroke. Gradually, this disaster was no longer just related to others. It was closely connected to everyone. Humanity was plunged into an unprecedented heat wave. Yet this was merely the beginning of the end. 01 When I was suspended from classes temporarily, and about to return to the dormitory, the sweltering heat made me extremely vexed. At the entrance of the girls' dormitory, a crowd was huddled. Another student suffering from heatstroke was being rushed to the ambulance. Such scenes had occurred frequently recently, and I had gradually become numb to them. This heat wave had persisted for over half a month, during which not a single drop of rain had fallen. Mountain fires were constantly breaking out in the vicinity. The high temperature led to power outages, and the daytime temperature soared directly to 48 degrees Celsius. Even at 12 o'clock at night, the temperature remained stubbornly high, staying at 40 degrees Celsius. Under this continuous heat, many outdoor workers and the elderly died of heatstroke due to untimely treatment. The famous scenic spot in my school directly exposed its riverbed. It was said that a certain lake had dried up and turned into a grassland, as if Finjungla, the ancient phrase, the vicissitudes of life. To comply with the city's power-saving policy, halfway through the afternoon class, the teacher informed us that power rationing was about to begin. We were told to hurry back to the dormitory to escape the heat. Each dormitory was given a box of Huaxiangjingqi Shui, and we were reminded to pay attention to the prevention of heatstroke. At this crucial moment, it was evident that the school had made great efforts to obtain so much Huaxiangjingqi Shui. Unfortunately, although the school had backup generators, they were insufficient to support the entire large campus, and the dormitory still lost power. The dormitory without air conditioning was like a sauna room in a northern bathhouse. We were sweating profusely. We hurriedly went downstairs, seizing the initiative to choose shaded areas under the flower beds downstairs to sit. Yet this did not alleviate the heat at all. Fortunately, the small supermarket in the dormitory area had its own backup power generation equipment, barely keeping the freezers running. My roommate, Wang Wan, carried the cold water and ice cream she had managed to grab with all her might, and distributed them to us one by one. We were so touched that we almost regarded her as our ancestor. Drinking the cold water, I took out my phone and took a look. It was 2:12 p.m., the hottest time of the day. The real time temperature showed 40 degrees Celsius. 40 degrees Celsius? Looking at the distorted heat waves in front of me, that seemed to almost become tangible due to the intense heat, a strange feeling welled up in my heart. So I asked my roommates, the weather forecast says it's 40 degrees Celsius now, but why do I feel that today's temperature is hotter than the 48 degrees Celsius the day before yesterday? Do you feel the same way? I feel the same way. This is definitely more than 40 degrees Celsius. Did the weather forecast make a mistake? Wait, let me check the app on my phone. Zhao Yinyan said as she took out her phone and took a look. Then she exclaimed in surprise. It really is 40 degrees Celsius. What on earth is going on? It's so hot. Because the weather was so unbearably hot, the two of us reached a consensus and started casually complaining about the terrible weather. Just as we were talking with great enthusiasm, Yin Xiao, who had been listening to us for a long time, had a serious expression. She interrupted us. Lin Yu Yinyan Wang Wan look. She handed over her phone, on which there were a bunch of conversations in a mixture of English and Chinese. We all looked at her in confusion. Yin Xiao leaned forward, motioned for us to come closer, and then lowered her voice and said, "This was sent to me by my brother. It's the result of their recent research in the laboratory. It says that solar flares are erupting violently, and soon the temperature will get higher and higher. He told me to make some preparations in case of power outages and water cuts caused by the high temperature." "Ah, is this for real?" Zhao Yinyan asked skeptically. This made Yin Zhao's face look a bit unpleasant. "If you don't believe it, that's fine." To be honest, I wasn't very convinced either. After all, such remarks could be heard several times a year. But this time, there was an indescribable strange feeling in my heart. The weather recently had indeed been unusually hot. Moreover, Yin Zhao's brother was really capable. She admired her brother, who had won numerous awards, very much and didn't like to hear others speak ill of him. So Wang Wan and I quickly smiled and tried to smooth things over for the two of them. Zhao Yinyan also came to her senses and apologized, saying that she had just spoken impulsively and didn't mean to disbelieve her brother. Yin Zhao's face softened a bit, and she continued, "My brother also reported this situation, but no one believed him. I always feel very uneasy." "Me too. I have an indescribable sense of unease. I echoed her words and then asked my roommates. I think it's better to believe it than not to. It won't hurt to make some preparations. What do you think? They thought for a while. And finally we unanimously decided that it was better to make some necessary preparations. At this time, we even joked with each other, thinking that if we made preparations and nothing happened in the end, we might feel stupid when we looked back. However, when we turned around, we found that Yin Xiao was still sitting on the flower bed, with her head down and motionless. I was a bit puzzled and asked her, "By the way, Yin Xiao, did your brother say roughly when the temperature would rise?" But Yin Xiao, who was asked the question, looked at her phone and stood up silently, her face full of panic. The sense of unease in my heart instantly magnified. I saw her hold up the phone screen towards me. The real-time temperature on the screen had changed from 40 degrees Celsius, just now to 43 degrees Celsius. In the blink of an eye, it became 45 degrees Celsius. The temperature seemed to be rising at an unpredictable and rapid speed. And at this moment, Yin Xiao's reply, with her lips trembling, drifted into my ears along with the heat waves. Right now. 02 After a deathly silence, the four of us exchanged glances, and immediately rushed towards the school supermarket. On the way, I called my boyfriend Fuyu, asking his dormitory to also make preparations for emergencies, and asking him to bring one of the solar panels he had bought for fun when he came. Due to the epidemic control, the access management of our school was extremely strict. There was no way to think about off-campus supermarkets or takeout. The only option was the small supermarket in the school. However, with the continuous high heat in recent days, as if the school had calculated it, the control of water sources in the supermarket was particularly sensitive. Besides the scattered ones sold in the freezer, for the remaining water, as long as a large quantity was purchased, the student ID had to be registered, and each person was limited to purchasing no more than 2 items, with each item being a 12-bottle package, which meant that each of us could only take 24 bottles plus a few scattered ones in the freezer. Fortunately, there was no limit on food purchases. We mainly bought dried meat, vacuum-packed foods that were not easily perishable under high temperatures, and also some basic daily necessities, small fans that could be used with both USB and batteries, power banks, as well as buckets and basins. The school supermarket was really too small, and the variety of items sold was very limited. We carefully checked for a long time, but couldn't find any more useful things. When we returned to the dormitory, we filled all the buckets and basins with water and placed them. There was hardly any space to step in the dormitory. Looking at the dormitory filled to the brim by us, I wiped the sweat that kept pouring out of my body. At this time, Yin Xiao, who had just returned after filling the last basin of water, announced that the water supply in the water room had stopped. I exhaled a hot breath and took out my phone to check. Only a little over an hour had passed, and the temperature had already reached 47 degrees Celsius. Although the temperature had reached 47 degrees Celsius a few days ago, it wasn't as hot as today. I suddenly had an illusion that the real-time temperature forecast had become unbalanced. 03 Through the dormitory window, the air outside could be seen distorting and deforming. The shaded area under the small flower bed downstairs had also lost its only advantage, and people were running back to the dormitories one after another. The shouts of "It's so hot to death" echoed continuously. I installed the solar panel that Fuyu had just given me in the direct sunlight area outside the balcony. This was a souvenir we brought back when we visited the Science and Technology Museum during the holiday. Although it couldn't drive large appliances like air conditioners, it was no problem to charge the phone and power the fan. While the sun was shining brightly, we charged the power banks and various electronic devices we bought. Then, using the battery-powered small fans with a water-filled bottle with several holes tied to them, we sat around and blew the wind to cool down. The water was all fetched from the water room when the water supply hadn't stopped. We collected a lot of empty bottles from several adjacent dormitories and filled each of them with water, preparing to store them for use. The temperature was getting higher and higher. People outside had all dispersed, except for the continuous stream of people moving water from the supermarket. By 4:30 p.m., the temperature had reached 49 degrees Celsius. Every time we took a breath, there was an illusion of suffocation. When we finally managed to lie on the ground and cool down a bit, and were about to check our phones, we found that the network signal had disappeared. Shouts also rang out intermittently in the corridor. Does anyone's phone have a signal? I don't have it. Neither do I. What's going on? Everyone was making a commotion, and the school broadcast, which had lost power, didn't sound. For a while, the disputes in the entire building turned into a chaotic mess, until a loud bang dash sound disrupted the commotion and made the entire building fall silent, because almost everyone was lying on the balcony and saw the place where the sound came from. It was an asphalt area. The asphalt on the surface layer had melted and was winding in all directions. The sound just now was the loud noise when the ground cracked beneath it. The ground had been melted and cracked by the heat, but this wasn't the reason for the complete disappearance of the commotion. After the ground cracked, the high-voltage cable not far away also made a sound like static electricity bursting, with visible sparks. We had never seen such a scene before, and panic instantly enveloped the entire campus. 04 After a few seconds of silence, the noise in the dormitory building erupted again, and turned into a chaotic mess. Some people started running out of the dormitory in a panic, heading towards the school gate. What should we do? Should we run to? The few of us fell into deep thought. If we ran, where could we run? Just now, pushed by the panicked crowd, someone fell to the ground. The girl let out a wail. When she was helped up, the exposed skin on the ground that touched her was shockingly red, like a burn. At this time, I don't know if the school finally used the generator to power the broadcasting room. The long silent school broadcast finally made a sound. Hello. Hello. Crackle crackle. Hello. All students, please don't run around. All students, please don't run around. Please return to the dormitory immediately. Please return to the dormitory immediately. Please follow the unified command. All students do not stay outside. We have arranged teachers to guide the evacuation. Please cooperate in an orderly manner. Broadcast notice. Broadcast notice. Then it was repeated several times, and finally the panicked crowd was stopped. Our hearts were temporarily calmed down. The people outside also started to return to the dormitory building one after another. Soon, the sound of the teacher using a megaphone to uniformly allocate and evacuate came from downstairs. All students, please listen to the arrangements. Follow your instructors. We are about to evacuate to the nearby subway station evacuation and resettlement point. Everyone don't push, don't be chaotic, and follow the unified arrangements. We also went downstairs, but as soon as the people became dense, the heat doubled directly. Fear lingered in our hearts. Now we could only follow the instructions and quickly evacuate to the resettlement point according to the school's arrangements. The subway station where we were resettled was only a little over 1 kilometer away from our school gate. But this section of the road became the most difficult road I had ever walked in my short 20-some years of life. This was also the first time I saw the orange halo in the sky, like an eternal setting sun. It was extremely beautiful, but also made people extremely uneasy. 05 Our school was built in a university town away from the urban area. Looking into the distance, among the scattered buildings, many were billowing with thick smoke and were already on fire. When we arrived at the subway station, it wasn't as good as we had imagined, because the subway station had also lost power. Not only us, but students and residents from nearby schools were also evacuated here. Presumably, there were no other bomb shelters nearby. Filled with a large number of people in an instant, the temperature inside the subway station continued to rise and couldn't relieve the intense heat brought from the outside at all. The only consolation was probably that our phones finally had a little signal. People around started calling their parents. Those who were lucky enough to get through cried uncontrollably. Those who couldn't get through anxiously held their phones up and looked for a signal everywhere. I was one of the unlucky ones, but I comforted myself that fortunately, my parents were in the north and should be fine. 06 We sat cross-legged in groups of 3 or 2, unanimously waiting for the night to fall. We all silently hoped in our hearts that perhaps after the sun disappeared, this high-temperature torture would ease a lot. We used our phones with intermittent signals to browse the news and report our safety to our family and friends. Voices of discussion kept coming from the crowd. Is it the end of the world? I heard that many regions in many countries are experiencing extremely high temperatures, and a lot of people have died. It seems that the volcano in the neighboring country has erupted. I saw that too. Just now, I also scrolled to the news that in the neighboring country, due to a fire, it burned near the nuclear power plant and almost blew up the nuclear power plant. I read in the news that there were earthquakes in some places. At first, everyone was discussing these topics related to meteorological disasters, or whether it was really the end of the world. Later, as more and more people entered the subway station, the temperature continued to rise and it got hotter and hotter, until a crying scream. Teacher, come and take a look. My roommate has fainted. Someone had fainted due to heat stroke, and the school authorities hurriedly rushed to deal with it. Later, teacher, I don't feel well either. Teacher, here. Come and take a look at my roommate. Does he have heat stroke? Teacher, instructor. More and more people started to faint, and some even had high fevers and convulsions. The school authorities were simply too busy to handle it. But after all the emergency calls were made, no rescue came for a long time. This city had fallen into chaos. 07 My roommates and I were sitting in the corner, already so hot that we were on the verge of collapse. As soon as the sweat came out, it was quickly evaporated. The water we brought had already been drunk up. Zhao Yinyan's phone even crashed due to the high temperature. Just now, I heard someone who brought a portable thermometer say that the temperature here had reached 50 degrees Celsius. I remember reading relevant research that a human body can persist for 1 hour in an environment of 71 degrees Celsius, for 49 minutes at 82 degrees Celsius, for 33 minutes at 93 degrees Celsius, and for 26 minutes at 104 degrees Celsius. These are the temperatures in which the human body can still breathe when placed in them. But the prerequisite is that there is water replenishment and sufficient oxygen. Once these conditions are lacking, and the body temperature exceeds 42 degrees Celsius, the functions of the central nervous system will be severely disordered, and there will be a life-threatening danger. If we continue to sit and wait for death like this, something will happen to all of us. 08 I felt that this couldn't go on like this, so I told my roommates my thoughts, and also contacted my boyfriend and his friends. Finally, after unanimous decision, we were going to leave the subway station and return to the dormitory for self-rescue. But when we found our instructor, we were stopped. What's wrong with you kids? Don't cause more trouble. I'm so busy. Instructor, I'm sorry to trouble you, but we have reasons to return to the dormitory. If there are any consequences, we will bear them ourselves. Of course, the instructor didn't agree. It was her responsibility to take care of our safety. But in special times, things couldn't be the same as usual. There was no way, so we had to be polite first and then forceful. Because there were too many people, the school authorities simply couldn't keep an eye on everyone. Taking advantage of the instructor's inattention, we directly slipped out. When we left the subway station, it was already dark outside. But the setting of the sun didn't take away the remaining heat of this high-temperature disaster. On the steaming street, the air was distorted and suffocating. In a trance, I remembered the Doomsday game I had played before. For a moment, I didn't know whether I was really experiencing this intense heat or playing a game in my dream. But I hoped that this was just a game. And when I opened my eyes again, everything could return to peace. 09 We supported each other as we walked towards the campus dormitory building. The campus, which was usually bustling with activity, was now in complete silence. When we went upstairs, we discovered that there were actually some people who hadn't followed the large group earlier, but had instead hidden in their dormitories, using the stored water to dissipate heat. When those people saw us, they immediately closed their dormitory doors warily. We didn't pay them any more attention, and instead quickly made our way to our own dormitory. The dormitory building, with a large number of people gone, was much better than the sweltering subway station just now. After entering the room, we immediately turned on the fan that had been recharged. Although the wind it blew was hot, it was better than nothing. During the evacuation just now, Wang Wan had shown signs of severe dehydration. We poured the Huaxiangjingqi shui given during the afternoon class into her, and then, based on her body size, we took out some water from the large bucket we bought from the supermarket and placed her in it. During the time we were away from the dormitory, a lot of the water we had stored had evaporated. In some small basins, the water had even decreased to half. However, the overall water storage was still sufficient for the four of us. Wang Wan let out a comfortable sigh when she touched the water, indicating that her dehydration symptoms had eased considerably with the replenishment of water. Seeing that this method was effective, the three of us immediately followed suit. Each of us forced ourselves to drink a bottle of Huaxiangjingqi shui, and then got into the bucket. The moment I touched the water, I felt as if my life had been sublimated. It was as if we were all taking a hot bath together. 10 As the number of people decreased, the mobile phone signal on campus, which had been disrupted due to congestion, improved significantly. We huddled in the buckets and called our respective families. I am from the north, and enrolled in a southern university. When the call was connected, my parents said they were safe, and that the temperature in the north was normal. However, after seeing the news, they had been unable to contact me, and the two of them were extremely worried. My mother said that she had wanted to come to find me at that time, but all the flights, high-speed trains, and trains to our city had been closed. My mother cried sadly, "Lingyu, why don't you stop going to school? See if you can buy a ticket tomorrow, and come home first. Mom is so worried. Mom doesn't expect you to achieve great things, just wants you to be healthy." I had been strong throughout the day, but the moment I heard my mother's voice, I couldn't hold back my tears and cried "Why?" Wiping away my tears, I learned from my mother many news that hadn't spread, yet due to the signal problem. It turned out that it wasn't that no one cared about the students with heat stroke. The entire city was in chaos. I still wanted to talk to my parents for a while longer, but unfortunately, the signal started to deteriorate again. So I quickly said a few words to my mother. If I can buy a ticket tomorrow, I will go home immediately. Only then did my mother feel a little more at ease, and hung up the phone. After making our calls, the four of us chatted while soaking in the buckets. Under extreme fear and exhaustion, I don't know when I fell asleep. When I woke up again, the sky was just getting bright outside, and everything seemed peaceful. I got out of the bucket still sweating profusely. I had thought that the air in the early morning would be a bit cooler, but as soon as I opened the window, the fierce heat wave rushed towards me again. I immediately and obediently got back into the bucket. I opened my phone and took a look. There were actually some messages in the class group, but the content in it was shocking to me. In just one night, countless people had collapsed in the subway station. The ambulances had come several times, but couldn't take them all away. Later, the medical staff directly set up a camp in the subway station, but they were also made of flesh and blood, and one by one, they also collapsed. In the photos, people of all kinds were lying on the ground. Although no one mentioned it, the classmates who had fallen silent beside them had been silently pronounced dead. 11 My mood was extremely heavy. Now the entire city not only had water and power cuts, and a shortage of water sources, but also all resources were unable to be delivered due to the obstruction of the high temperature. The only good news was probably that it was 5 o'clock in the morning now, and the temperature had dropped from yesterday's 50 degrees Celsius to 45 degrees Celsius. But the next second, my boyfriend Fuyu's call came, and this only joy I had was dispelled. "Lingyu, we may have to leave." "Leave? Where to?" I frowned in confusion and lowered my voice. My roommates' always tense nerves were still inevitably awakened by my voice, and they looked at me blankly. Seeing that they were awake, I put my phone on speaker. Fuyu's voice rang in the dormitory. "I received the news that City C is going to be under lockdown today." "Lockdown? Why?" "I don't know, but we have to leave quickly. Currently, all passenger transportation methods have come to a halt, and the power has collapsed. If we don't leave, I'm afraid we won't be able to. Then where are we going? Zhao Yunyan, who was beside me, was scared to tears. Fuyu was silent for a while. This is what we'll do. Linyu, you guys pack your things. I'll try to get 2 cars. We'll go north. The weather in the north is normal now. We'll head north. I pursed my lips and thought for a while, and finally replied to him. Okay, let's go in the direction of my home. We'll pack our things first and wait for your news. Our conversation was very fast, filled with an urgency we had never felt before. I looked up at the window. The sun, which had sheltered us for thousands of years, was now so dazzling that my heart became more and more uneasy. I didn't know whether this decision of ours was right or wrong, but my intuition told me that we had to leave, and the sooner the better. 12 without the restrictions on entering and leaving the campus, it was much more convenient to move around. One of Fuyu's roommates was a rich second generation, and it was very convenient for him to get a car, which saved us a lot of time invisibly. We were divided into 2 groups of 2 men and 2 women, and got into 2 cars respectively, dividing all the existing water sources and food equally between the 2 cars. Because of the heat and the urgency, we completed this process within half an hour. The cars had already been filled with gas. After getting in the car and turning on the long-awaited air conditioning, the heat wave that had persisted for several days finally receded from our bodies. Fuyu drove our car and headed towards the highway according to the navigation. I had thought that since our school was built in the suburbs, it should be very close to the highway entrance. But reality taught me how lucky we were to be confined to a corner of the school. There were fires blazing everywhere in the entire city, and in the smoky fire, it was like a purgatory on earth. The crashed vehicles on the road, the people running in a hurry to take refuge, the fire department, the police, the medical staff, the military, and the masses were all working together. Everyone was busy protecting the city. Because of the fallen trees and roadblocks burned by the fire, we had to change our routes many times before driving in the direction of the highway entrance. But here, there were already countless vehicles lined up, as if they all had the same idea as us. Waiting was the most tormenting. We queued for nearly 3 hours for a 2-kilometer road. It was already 10 o'clock in the morning, and the temperature started to rise again. Although there was air conditioning in the car, the places exposed to the sun were itchy and stinging. I had to take out a coat and block it on the car window to block the sunlight. 13 There were still 5 cars in front of us, and it would soon be our turn. Seeing hope and also to liven up the atmosphere, I asked, I have a question. Fuyu in the driver's seat turned his head and replied softly to me. What's wrong? This isn't an epidemic. Why is the city being locked down? My boyfriend, who always seemed very knowledgeable in front of me, was silent for a moment and rarely replied to me with, I don't know either. I stared at him with wide eyes. At this time Wang Guan, who had been playing with her phone beside me, suddenly shouted, I know, quick, tell us. I immediately became interested. As a result, Wang Guan only replied to me with, because someone spread rumors. I was stunned on the spot. She immediately stuffed her phone into my hand and pointed to the news headline on it for me to see. Jiang Mao was taken away by the police for spreading rumors about the lockdown of City C. Goodness, it really was a rumor. We were all a bit stunned. So what do we do now? I pointed to the toll booth that we were about to pass in front, and then to the long line of cars behind us. Our situation was quite awkward at the moment. Because we couldn't make a decision, I was going to ask the opinions of the others in the other car. They were right behind us. At that moment, my mind went blank, and I forgot about my phone. I opened the car door and was about to get out and walk over to ask. But thanks to this subconscious and foolish act of mine, otherwise, we would all have been in trouble here. 14 The moment the car door opened, I instantly felt as if I had entered an incinerator. The heat outside was even more terrifying than last night's temperature. But the real-time temperature displayed on the phone was 48 degrees Celsius. Even if my perception of temperature was inaccurate due to the air conditioning, it shouldn't be to this extent. I immediately retracted my foot, closed the car door, and turned around with a look of horror. The expressions of the 3 people in the car also changed simultaneously. They felt it too. What's going on? I couldn't figure out why it had suddenly become so hot. While I was lost in thought, I caught a glimpse of the corner outside. Instantly my mind raced. Something's wrong. We have to get through quickly. Linyu, what's going on? I immediately explained in a hurried tone. With so many cars here, all with their air conditioners on, no wonder the temperature is so high. We have to quickly notify everyone to disperse. Look at that car from the neighboring country over there. The rear windshield is starting to crack. With so many cars together, if one car explodes, everyone will be doomed. And look over there. I pointed to the lane for large vehicles, where a large tanker marked with the symbol for flammable and explosive substances was queuing. If something happened to this vehicle, it was simply unthinkable. I'll get out of the car and communicate with them. Linyu, you quickly contact our other car. As soon as he finished speaking, Fuyu immediately got out of the car and ran towards the toll booth. I also immediately took out my phone and called Zhao Yinyan and the others, repeating what I had just said. 3 minutes later, Fuyu returned with a gloomy face. We hurriedly asked him, how was it? Fuyu always had a good temper, but this time the words he said carried some anger. They told me, a student, not to cause trouble and not to spread rumors. So what do we do? Call the fire department to remind them. Let's go through first. Okay, the atmosphere became a bit dull for a while. However, what made it even duller was that the fire department's phone couldn't be reached. 15 times seemed to pass by extremely slowly, but clearly, there was only a short distance with just a few cars in front, yet there was no sign of any movement. The navigation traffic conditions showed that the congestion at the highway entrance had extended to the urban area. We sat in the car, waiting anxiously, constantly observing the traffic conditions around us. The owner of the car with the rear windshield starting to crack seemed to have noticed the problem. He got out of the car and checked around in the heat, cursed helplessly twice, and then got back into the car. The long line of cars in the entire convoy also became impatient. Some people started honking their horns and shouting curses with the windows open. What are they doing in front? Can we go or not? They're so slow. They can't even catch up with the funeral. These people are so slow at handling things. One person's resentment was like the first lit torch, and the torches all around were lit one after another, and everyone started to quarrel. Some people even got out of the car and went to the toll booth to argue. I don't know what they said. Perhaps because of the extremely hot weather, people couldn't control their tempers, and the two groups of people actually started fighting. This was bad. We sat in the car, extremely anxious. The continuous horn sounds behind us were like a death, urging accompaniment. Time was passing by bit. The situation was at a standstill, but the temperature was rising mercilessly. 2 minutes passed 47 degrees Celsius. 5 minutes passed 48 degrees Celsius. 7 minutes 49 degrees Celsius. 8 minutes 50 degrees Celsius. It was still rising. I felt the car window starting to make a faint cracking sound. 10 minutes 53 degrees Celsius. 12 minutes 54 degrees Celsius. Bang crack, the sound of sudden braking. The next second, flames shot up behind us. The flames were so dazzling that I reflexively covered my eyes. Unexpectedly, a car not far behind had spontaneously combusted due to the heat. In shock, I only heard Fuyu let out a low shout. Brace yourselves. The next second, he moved to turn the steering wheel and stepped on the gas pedal. Ah! Caught off guard. I was directly flung onto Wang Wuan beside me. Screech, screech, bang. There were the sounds of vehicle brakes and collisions everywhere. Fuyu reacted quickly and immediately changed lanes. Fortunately, the car in front of us also reacted rapidly. It crashed into the car further ahead and broke through the barrier, giving Fuyu the opportunity to squeeze into the narrow passage and dash out with it. Fuyu stepped on the gas pedal hard to accelerate. I was helped up by Wang Wuan and looked back. The toll booth that was originally quietly queuing was like a sluice gate releasing floodwaters. All the cars were scrambling to rush out. It was a race against death. No one was willing to yield. The tongues of fire behind shot up into the sky. The fire ignited the front-running vehicles in a chain reaction and exploded directly under the impetus of the extreme high temperature. Anyone who was a bit slower would end up as a burning ship being burned to ashes together. Fuyu drove at full speed in the first row. The cars behind accelerated and collided without distinction. Bang! The flying tires and parts. The car bodies flying out of the fence and falling to the bottom of the mountain, scattering, colliding in a chain reaction, not giving the survivors a chance to catch their breath, and instantly catching fire under the high temperature. 16 Fuyu's hand gripping the steering wheel was so forceful that the veins bulged. He looked ahead intently, not daring to reduce the speed at all, because we all knew in our hearts that there was something even more dangerous behind. That oil tanker. I still remember that one year, an oil tanker exploded on the G15 expressway, destroying an entire village around it. Fuyu pulled the speed of the car to the limit. The entire car body began to drift under the distorted hot air. The fleeing cars behind closely followed at high speed. I kept dialing the emergency number with trembling hands. I didn't know whether there was no signal here originally, or whether the high-speed driving had affected the signal. The call couldn't get through at all. I tightened my seatbelt, held Wang Ruan's hand tightly, and closed my eyes nervously. 1 minute. 93 seconds. 128 seconds. 135 seconds. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion sounded. There was a piercing whine. My eardrums seemed to be pierced. The world lost its sound and went blank. The car body was violently shaken by the shockwave. Everyone was thrown backward by inertia. Fuyu almost lost control of the steering wheel and crashed into the fence. I looked back in horror and saw a scene that I would never forget in my life. A mushroom cloud shot up into the sky from the direction of the toll booth. Thick smoke and fierce flames billowed. The flames shot up into the sky, dozens of meters high. The sound of explosions in the distance was still coming continuously. I could almost imagine the scene of those crowded cars exploding in a chain reaction one by one. 17 Fuyu slowed down a bit. We were safe. Finally, everyone let out a sigh of relief. As if it was a shared understanding, the cars that had raced against death with us on the expressway all silently slowed down and stopped on the emergency lane. Fuyu opened the door, helped me out of the car, and we walked towards the back of the car together. The people in our other car also got out and walked over. We stood on the side of the road and silently looked in the direction we had come from. The flames all over the sky burned into the urban area along with the traffic that had been queuing up to the urban area. In just a few minutes, it had reddened half of the sky in City C. The white car that had first crashed through the barrier and rushed out of the toll booth with us also had people get out. It was a family of 3. The child was about 5 or 6 years old. He was so hot that he was sweating profusely. He said in a childish voice, innocently asking his tear-eyed parents, "Mom and Dad, where are we going? Why don't we go home? I'm so hot." The child's mother hugged him tightly in her arms with tears in her eyes, kissed his forehead, and coaxed him in a low voice. Sadness spread among U.S. survivors. We all looked towards the direction of the school. In this city engulfed in flames, there were also our classmates, friends, and teachers. But in the face of such a natural disaster, we were so small and powerless. We could only hope that they would be safe, and that there would be a day when we could meet again. 18 I looked at the sky of City C, which was burning brightly and spectacularly, and felt that the temperature was getting even hotter. I checked the temperature. Sure enough, it was still rising. The City C trapped by the fire was like adding a basin of water to a charcoal brazier, fueling the fire, and making it burn more vigorously. Therefore, the temperature soared even more in a short time. We couldn't bear the heat, and started to get back into the car, after getting out for less than a minute. Before leaving, I took one last look at City C. When I retracted my gaze, I froze in place. I looked back in horror and stared in the direction I had glimpsed out of the corner of my eye just now. City C is a mountain city, surrounded by mountains on all sides. The fire had somehow spread from the city to the mountainside. But in the mountains, a tiny spark could start a prairie fire. And this section of the expressway where we were located was built along the mountain. The mountain fire was approaching us at an unstoppable speed. The most terrifying thing was that due to the overload of high temperature, cracks were faintly appearing in the melted ground, and the wet soil buried underneath was churning up, as if it was about to split in the middle at any second. I took 2 steps back in horror, my lips trembling up and down. As I ran towards the car, I shouted at the top of my voice, "Hurry! Hurry! Get in the car quickly! Run!" Everyone got into the car in a daze, and in a hurry under my heart-rending shouts. Fuyu heard my shouts and started the car the moment everyone got in, driving at the same life-threatening speed as before. At first, the other vehicles didn't understand and followed us. Later, when they saw the continuously churning and splitting ground behind them, and the endless flames burning in the forest, like a dragon's breath, following closely behind us, they all sped along the road at high speed. Sizzle, sizzle. In the speeding car I didn't know what that sound was. Sizzle, sizzle, bang, bang. The window glass exploded. I quickly pulled Wang Wan beside me to lower our heads and protect ourselves. Without the glass, the hot air driven by the high speed hit us. I don't know if anyone else has ever felt the hot air cutting their face like we did. I think the ancient punishment of branding was nothing more than this. 19 We ran for our lives, unable to tell the time or the space. We could only trust Fuyu, who was holding the steering wheel, in the hot and turbid air. He was feeling even worse than us. We could lower our heads to block some of the wind, but he had to see the road conditions clearly and pay close attention to the ever-changing environment around him. I felt extremely distressed, but didn't dare to speak to disturb him, for fear that my emotional words and actions would cause him some trouble. Finally, when I felt that the last trace of moisture in my body was about to be evaporated by the scorching air, we drove out of the mountainous area of the expressway and passed the border between City C and City B. Seeing that there was no sign of the flames following us, and the cracked road surface was not spreading anymore, Fuyu finally reduced the speed of the car. After stepping on the brakes and stopping steadily, he slumped back on the seat, closed his eyes tightly, and frowned in discomfort. I quickly unbuckled my seatbelt, scrambled to the back of the car, held back my tears that were about to fall, and together with Wang Ruan and Fuyu's roommate, Zhao Qian, took out the water we had stored from the trunk and fed it to his mouth. We also poured it on his body. Then we took a hard paper that we found in the car and used it as a fan to fan him, looking at him with red eyes. After a while he seemed to feel much better. He struggled to open his eyes. Presumably, seeing my extremely embarrassed appearance, he wearily raised his hand and touched my head, softly comforting me. "Don't cry. I'm okay." I didn't say anything. I placed his hand properly and stubbornly fanned him. 20 at 4:21 p.m., after the collective rest, Zhao Qian took over from Fuyu, and we set off again. Without the car windows, we tied plastic bags and clothes on both sides of the car to temporarily replace the windows. Now the air conditioning in the car couldn't be used. We didn't stint on the water source in Huoxiang Jingqi Shui. We drank and used them as needed to prevent anyone from getting dehydrated or having heatstroke symptoms, and ensure timely treatment. First, we ensured that everyone was in a safe state before considering the water source problem. Otherwise, if we saved the water source but someone had an accident, what was the use of keeping it? Fortunately, there were no more thrilling dangers on the remaining journey. Away from City C, the temperature also dropped to 49 degrees Celsius. However, due to the high temperature escape just now, many people's mobile phones had crashed. Only my phone and Zhao Yinyan's in the other car could barely function. Although there was a signal, the phone lines couldn't be dialed out. We could only use the occasional 4G signal to send 1 or 2 messages. We drove until after 6 p.m. and entered the service area. It was crowded with people who had fled from surrounding areas. Everyone was extremely tired. The gas station was no longer attended, but fortunately, there was still fuel in storage. We imitated the actions and appearances of some people and filled up the car with gas. After talking with the people, we finally got several important pieces of information. First, with City C as the center, all the surrounding cities had experienced that high-temperature riot. The whole city was on fire, and in some places, the The ground had also cracked, forming countless abysses. Second, all means of transportation except driving had come to a halt. The train and high-speed rail tracks had become deformed due to the heat, and derailments had occurred, causing countless casualties. Flights had been directly suspended. Third, currently many sections of the expressway had been destroyed and blocked. Only the direction towards City A was passable, and City A had relatively minor damage at present, and had been used as a safe evacuation point. 21 After considering the information, and having a discussion, we finally decided to head in the direction of City A. At 7:32 p.m., we set off on the way to City A. Fortunately, the rest of the journey was smooth. We just passed many malfunctioning vehicles along the way. There were cars with flat tires, cars that had crashed, and cars with exploded windows like ours, with various types of damage. They were all standing on the side of the road, stretching out their hands to stop the passing cars, and asking for a ride. But on the way to escape, every car was full of people, and no one stopped for them. Although the temperature was extremely high, I leaned back on the seat after running for my life all day. I don't know when I fell asleep. During this short period of sleep, I didn't sleep well. In my dream, I kept repeating the scene of the sky, high flames. When I was awakened by the argument, cold sweat was still pouring out of my forehead. What happened? I got up in a daze, and looked at Fuyu and the others who were talking in a low voice. Fuyu patted me soothingly. It's okay. Go back to sleep. I struggled to sit up and was in a daze for a long time, until I moved my stiff neck from sleeping. I suddenly realized that the temperature seemed to have dropped. I actually felt a cool breeze with a hint of moisture. I quickly turned around, and pulled open the window made of clothes on one side. Fine raindrops fell on my face. It was raining. I couldn't believe it. It was really raining. I tugged at Fuyu's sleeve. Ayu! Look, it's raining. It's raining. I was extremely excited. Fuyu seemed to be infected by my joy and replied with a smile. Yes, it's raining. I held my hand out to catch the raindrops for a while, and then I remembered. What were you guys talking about just now? We were discussing that we need to speed up to get to City A. Why? I was a bit scared after being frightened and tossed around all day and asked uneasily. Then Fuyu took my phone, and took a screenshot of a weather forecast that had been refreshed when the signal appeared recently. It stated that there would be hail accompanied by thunderstorms, rain, and strong winds at night, which might cause hail disasters. I glanced at our car that was full of drafts on all sides, then at the words on my phone. I looked at the words on the phone again, and then at the distance to City A shown on the car navigation. My heart sank to the bottom. 22 The journey continued, and the rain became heavier, seriously affecting the speed of our vehicle. 4 kilometers away from the exit of the expressway to City A, our struggling car finally broke down, and the car that Zhao Yinyan and the others were in had already stalled 50 kilometers ago. The 4 girls in our dormitory squeezed into the back seat, and the remaining 2 boys were taken in the car by the eldest brother of that family of 3. We had to get out of the car and walk on the expressway in the rain. The 2 boys who were in the car pulled by the eldest brother got out of the car voluntarily and gave their seats to Yin Xiao and Wang Wan, who were so uncomfortable that they were on the verge of fainting. Zhao Yinyan and I held hands and walked behind the boys, who blocked most of the wind and rain for us in front. In the pouring wind and rain, people walked extremely slowly. We struggled to take steps, not knowing how far we had traveled. A thunderclap in the distance split the night sky into daylight. This thunderclap was like an announcement. The next second, hail the size of rice grains hit us. All of us exchanged a glance, and immediately supported each other, and ran with our last bit of strength. The rain became heavier, and the hail grew larger. It hurt when it hit our bodies. Later, the hail that fell on the ground seemed to be developing into the size of a baby's fist. We could no longer move forward. Fuyu pulled me into his arms, protecting me with his body, and covering his head with his hand. I protected Zhao Yinyan, and the others tacitly protected each other. Zhao Yinyan had been hit so painfully that she started crying. I also inevitably shed physiological tears. I tightly held Fuyu's hand in return, and looked at the endless dark expressway. My heart was desolate and sorrowful. Although we usually seemed fearless, we were all just in our early 20s, and had not stepped into society, or seen the great rivers and mountains of our motherland. Were we really going to die in the wilderness? 23 Just when I thought we were going to die there, a beam of light pierced the darkness in front of us. Along with the flashing of blue and red lights, it came towards us slowly, stopped steadily, and approached us. Our collapsing emotions suddenly found salvation. My legs went weak, and I fell to the ground together with Zhao Yinyan, whom I was supporting. Even Fuyu couldn't hold us back. It turned out that after Yin Xiao, Wang Wan, and the others got off the expressway, they immediately found someone to rescue us. The traffic police officer sent us to the unified resettlement point in City A. After our group got together, we gave each other a big hug, and then cried tears of joy. With unified resettlement and arrangements, our tense spirits, which had been so for a long time, finally relaxed. Although City A was still in a state of water and power outages, the resettlement points for the refugees had unified power generation facilities, which could meet our basic daily needs. This place was actually the temporary hospital built during the epidemic. It had survived the high-temperature turmoil of the previous 2 days, and was used as a resettlement point. The arrival of this rain finally quenched the high temperature. Our phones also had a signal as we wished. They all used the only working phones of Zhao Yinyan and me to report their safety to their families. I also soothed my parents, who were crying uncontrollably, and said that I would go home as soon as the traffic was restored. 24 After arriving in City A, this apocalyptic disaster seemed to be finally coming to an end. We also kept an eye on the news of City C on the internet. The temperature in City C had also dropped, but due to the high temperature turmoil and the explosion at the expressway toll booth, the whole city was still like a beggar who had gone through hardships, gradually recovering its lost vitality. Although the surrounding cities were all facing difficulties themselves, they still dispatched supplies to City C and provided help to the best of their abilities. It was the unity of people after the disaster. We also tried our best to help restore people's livelihoods together with the volunteers at the resettlement point. During this period, we tried to contact the school and the instructor, but it seemed that the whole school had lost contact. Our lives had all changed unexpectedly due to this sudden high temperature. Although this disaster was not like those in disaster movies where millions, or even tens of millions of humans were destroyed at every turn, in reality, this was the most real appearance of the end of the world. The sorrow of those family members, and the cries for help of those who were seeking rescue were all indelible wounds in people's hearts. 25 On the fifth day in City A, continuous heavy rain broke the tranquility of the city. Since the first rain, the temperature in City A had dropped from the initial 40 degrees Celsius to 35 degrees Celsius, then from 35 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius in a short time, and finally plummeted to 20 degrees Celsius. This rain lasted for 2 days. The water level of the surrounding rivers rose sharply overnight, and City directly issued warnings of mountain floods and mudslide disasters. Tens of thousands of people were urgently relocated overnight. We also followed, and were relocated to a safer place. But looking at the rain curtain outside the window, that was so heavy that I couldn't see clearly, that sense of unease welled up again. The high temperature at that time had risen so abruptly, but what we didn't expect was that what awaited us was not coldness. It was an earthquake. When I was awakened by the earthquake in the middle of the night, I ran out in a panic. Fuyu pulled me and we ran out with the crowd. Accompanied by screams, we fled quickly and ran out in the heavy rain. The speed at which the whole building collapsed was beyond imagination. Just after I ran out more than 10 meters, the splashing gravel hit my foot and knocked me to my knees. Fortunately, Fuyu was quick, witted and pulled me up. Otherwise, I would have been buried in the ruins together with that building. Standing in the heavy rain with lingering fear, I looked at everything around me in a daze. The running crowd, the helpless cries, the wailing in the sky. Mom, wife, where are you? Help. Save me. Is there anyone to help me? Please help me. My son is trapped underneath. Everything was so illusory yet so real. Everything was so painful and helpless. But time didn't give us room to think. We quickly joined the rescue team and tried to help everyone. But later, no one could help them anymore. Because everyone was in danger themselves. This disaster still fell upon us survivors in another way. 26 aftershocks were still occurring continuously. The temperature had dropped to 10 degrees Celsius within an hour. Those who had run out wearing only a single layer of clothing for refuge could no longer hold on. This was not the most serious part. Because of the continuous endless rain, the water had already risen to my thighs. Even though we were prepared in advance, City A was still flooded. We followed the crowd and tried hard to find higher ground. But because the aftershocks were still occurring continuously, no one could guarantee the safety of the buildings that had not collapsed. But the water level didn't give us time to consider. It rose to my chest in a short time. The water in the low-temperature environment was so cold that I couldn't stop shivering. I even suddenly, inappropriately, missed the high temperature of the previous few days. Later, since the 4 of us girls were not very tall, we really had no choice. With the help of several boys, we were carried into the nearest building that had not collapsed. Sitting on the stairs on the 3rd floor, I took out my phone tremblingly, but it had already been soaked and couldn't be turned on. Only Zhao Yinyan's remaining phone gave us a glimmer of hope, but this hope was also shattered by the icon indicating no signal. We silently watched the water level outside keep rising, and then silently moved up another floor. The wet clothes stuck to my body, and my hands turned purple from the cold. I shivered and took out the thermometer I bought a few days ago. The temperature at this time was already 4 degrees Celsius. Fuyu took off his clothes and gave them to me, but I took them and put them back on him. At this time, don't care who is whose girlfriend, or who is a man and who is a woman. If any one of us catches a cold, our current situation can't solve it. Hearing this, Fuyu pursed his lips and replied okay, and put the clothes back on. Then he insistently took my hand to warm me up. At 9:34 p.m., we were sitting on the 4th floor, and the water level downstairs had flooded the 1st floor. At 10:43 p.m., it was 0 degrees Celsius, and the flood rushed into the 2nd floor. At 1:12 a.m., it was -5 degrees Celsius, and we hit on the 5th floor. At 2:07 a.m., there was no later. The rolling waves of water washed away the foundation of the next building. With a huge crashing sound, it rushed towards us with surging waves. It was impossible to tell whether this was an aftershock, or the final death knell rung by the flood for us. The moment the flood rushed over, Fuyu held me and fell into the water. Thud whoosh. All the memories flashed before my eyes like a gomaganhua. Thud whoosh. In the last second before I lost consciousness, Fuyu lifted me out of the water. Lin, you hold on. Cough cough dash. I coughed heart-rendingly, and my throat ached. In a daze, I instinctively grabbed the thing that Fuyu pushed towards me. It was a broken piece of wood, The desire to survive made me hold the floating wood tightly, and Fuyu held me under the water with one hand to prevent me from being washed away by the water, and held the wood with the other hand, floating with me along with the current. Fortunately, we were light enough in weight, and the wood had enough buoyancy. Otherwise, we would have really died in the water just now. But I smiled bitterly. I'm afraid this could only give us a little more time to survive. We had fled all the way, but finally, we couldn't escape this bad luck. The water at -5 degrees Celsius was bone chilling, and even had some ice shards. Fuyu and I were pushed by the waves, shivering until our lips turned black. The sky gradually brightened. Under the baptism of the rain curtain, it had a strange and breathtaking beauty, which made my original fear of death fade a lot. I looked at Fuyu, who was holding me and constantly breathing hot air to warm me up, and softly called his name. Fuyu. He looked up at me and still asked me gently, "What's wrong?" I smiled at him, and said it was nothing. Then, after thinking for a while, I leaned over to kiss him while maintaining my balance. I think if we can't go back this time. But still, thank you. And I'm sorry. I originally wanted to take you to meet my parents, but it seems I have to break my promise now. Hearing this, Fuyu lowered his head and smiled softly. He raised his hand, and touched my head as usual. But this time, his palm was no longer warm and dry. Instead, it carried the coldness of being washed by water. But it still made my heart flutter as it did the first time I saw him. He also smiled at me and said, "It's okay. You can make it up to me in the next life." We looked at each other for a while, and then smiled wordlessly. Then our two heads leaned against each other, snuggling up to each other, and floating on the water with no known destination. As the sky grew cooler, and the rain gradually stopped, we floated past a tree that had not fallen. It generously gave us a green leaf. We also floated past a person who was also trying to survive, but he had already lost his breath. Floating, I also closed my eyes wearily. I didn't know if it was the dimming of the light before death, or an illusion of the hope in my heart. In my last view, the color of camouflage actually appeared. Against the backdrop of the orange of the life jacket, it was very much like the magnificent orange sunset, burned by the fire under the high temperature that day. I held tightly the hand of Fuyu, who had already closed his eyes, and with my last bit of strength, I raised a smile. In the firm eyes that welcomed us, I finally closed my eyes with relief. 27 When I opened my eyes again, I was in a temporary hospital resettlement point, and beside me was Fuyu, who was holding my hands tightly. This disaster had claimed countless lives. None of us wanted to see that number again or mention it. Later, Fuyu and I placed our wishes for them in front of the whole wall of photos, and then quietly left the hospital. After that, in the city full of ruins, the traffic was the first to be restored. I followed the large group, and was sent back home, where I saw my parents who were crying so hard that they almost fainted when they hugged me. After comforting my parents, Fuyu and I went back to participate in the reconstruction of the disaster area together. Soon after, I received the notice of the resumption of classes at school as promised, and returned to the campus again. But among the 4 people who used to laugh and play in the dormitory, only Wang Wan and I were left now. Everything seemed to have settled down, but had this disaster really ended? I can only say no. Maybe, as countless scholars have said, the excessive destruction of the environment by humans has finally trapped us in a self-made cocoon. This is the punishment from the earth to us, and also a way for it to save itself. After we had attended classes safely for a few months, in the north during the winter vacation, the north that had been safe and sound in that disaster, a real cold winter came, an apocalyptic cold winter. As long as the trend of the environment is not perfectly solved, the end of the world will coexist with humanity.